Hey, welcome back to the Mistwood Publishing Book Club. I am your host, S.R. Mowry, and today we'll be looking at my book, The Veil of Stars, Chapter 21, The Dark Forest. So this chapter, really the end of part 2 for the rest of the book, was all a part of the original idea for the book. A lot of the earlier parts of the book, I knew Narbad was going to be a slave, but in the beginning, but his father being a part of it, really all the stuff between, the beginning of the book and the fact that he is a slave till all of part 1 pretty much, except for the fact that he is a slave, and pretty much all of part 2 were very vague in my head when I came up with this plot my freshman year of college. But from the point that they leave the Immortal Forest till the end of the book has always been very firm in my head. Maybe not down to the specifics of each small event within each chapter, but the general things that are going on were part of my plan. So the Dark Forest, we open up to get an update on Zach and Hale, who are fighting for their freedom with the Scan. The people that Narbad was fighting in the part 1 are now teamed up with Zach, as you know from following along. And they are now basically in open rebellion, open revolt against the Nocturian government in the capital city of Ikatop. Now, that's also happening, so Zach and their people that have freed them now are attacking from the inside while another Scan army is attacking from the outside. The Scan have learned their lesson. One of their kings was with Zach and Hale in the jail. So they have been planning this for a while, and now they have this leader. So it's a much more coordinated plan than the first one, and now we're actually rooting for them instead of, Noctfior. So it's a pretty intense fight where Zach and Hale get pretty dinged up, and you really don't know if they're going to make it. You don't know if they're going to survive. But then, if you caught in the previous chapter that they were in, there was a small tease that there were people watching them as they walked around the town looking for the orcs. Well, there was a small tease that some of the orcs had survived and were still alive, and now we see them show up at the last second to kind of save Zach and Hale's lives as they themselves have opened the gate, right? So their job was to open the gate so the main army could come in. And that probably wouldn't have been possible if these orcs wouldn't have jumped in to distract some of the army that was just, it was basically Hal and Zach versus the entire army. Because obviously none of the army is outside of the wall, because unlike in the conclusion of Game of Thrones, we know that's stupid. Why would you put soldiers outside of the wall if you have a wall? But, whatever. So then we get with an update with our main companions, and they are in the Dark Forest, and they're kind of just talking about how dreadful this place is, because it is. And we have some more confrontation with, kind of racial conflicts between Narbad, Ruth, and the dwarves and things like that. And Nellet is in mourning the death of, Elline, who has just died in the previous chapter, and they kind of had to just leave him there, and it's pretty emotional and terrible. And it's the Dark Forest, and it is just as dangerous as they think it is, and so they are set upon by vampires. And Narbad almost, he knows that they're coming before any of the others do, and the power of the orc is then activated in him because this is something, and part of why I did this in this chapter was to show this. Orcs were made specifically to defend the world, the goodly races of the world, from evil, and in particular, that evil being the spawns of Bjorn Darkheart from the Crimson Wars, which you've heard reference of in this book, this ancient war between one of the sons of Vandir, who at one point was the daughter, and then through necromancy was reborn as a son, and fused with hot metal and all that, in part because of the Crimson War. But there was this big war between orcs and the first vampires, essentially, because Bjorn had made the Havervi, which are the first vampires. And part of why the orcs were made was because, Gesu saw this threat coming. And so orcs are specially made to be able to kill vampires, which are essentially lesser versions of the original vampires. Because in the Crimson Wars, the orcs hunted down and killed all the Havervi. And just briefly, Bjorn can make a Havervi, but a Havervi cannot make another Havervi. When a Havervi bites somebody, it makes them into what we would know as a vampire. So just think of Bjorn as like the father of all vampires. The Havervi are the first vampires. They're like super vampires that don't look like humans. They're kind of monsters. And then when they seek to spread their virus, it makes what we would think of as a vampire. And orcs are particularly equipped to kill these things. And so we see that here. And Narbad absolutely lays waste to these vampires. A normal Firar, like an elf or a human or even a gnome or a Sakari or a giant, would have a hard time, probably not giant as much, but would have a hard time with a vampire. And they'd have to have specific methods to killing them. An orc, it's different. An orc, pretty much, if the power of the orc is activated within them, which should happen pretty much as soon as they see a vampire, they can just take him down like any other opponent, basically. Because the power of the orc is basically like a super steroid that goes through the orc's veins and basically gives them the strength of like Bane, essentially. Bane behind me there. And so Narbad basically saves their butts yet again. I did want this book to very much so feel like Bilbo with the dwarves, and that Bilbo is constantly saving them. And Narbad is doing that here, in part because in the next book, Narbad has to have his butt saved quite a few times, But he beats the vampires, and they talk, and some of them are kind of horrified by the sheer brutality that Narbad displays here, but that's kind of the point is, if God's going to make the perfect warrior, they have to be brutal. They have to be efficient killers. And elves and humans aren't necessarily capable of the same level of feat, military prowess that an orc is. And so, having seen Narbad unleash his full power on his ancient nemesis, his race's ancient nemesis, it makes some of the companions very impressed, and some of them, like Talia, a little bit disturbed. Because maybe, a lot of people, when they go up to war, they're surprised at, it's not usually what they see others do to somebody, it's more of what they see themselves do to somebody that makes them, it kind of gets to them. And so, Narbad, he knows what he's capable of because he already kind of saw that in the opening of the book. But his companions are kind of seeing his true power for the first time, and it shocks some of them. Now the next part, we have them fleeing basically through the dark forest, and we end with Narbad going up in a tree and trying to find, where is the Dark Tower? How do we get out of this? Not even trying to find the Dark Tower, just how do we get out of this forest? Like, where are we? Can I see the edge of it, the perimeter of the forest? And he sees the Dark Tower. And then at the end, they reach the clearing where the tower, the castle is, at the peak of it. And they're fleeing Hydra, the things that had killed Eileen. And as we'll find out in the next chapter, these Hydra aren't mindless in that maybe the companions are being drawn to this spot. But you'll have to find out in the next chapter. As for now, have a good week and peace out.